So the next question becomes, do I need to go to a rehab or not? In my own experience, my issues were related to alcohol. And at that time, I wasn't chemically dependent enough that I needed to be medically separated through a detox program under the guidance of doctors. It wasn't necessary for me to go through that process. For many people who have substance issues or generally substance issues, it is necessary for them to safely be detoxed from that substance. And so you will know for yourself where you're at with your own issue. When it comes to beyond that, when it comes to giving yourself the best chance to become and stay sober, clean, free from whatever the thing is that is impacting your life, the question of whether or not one needs to go to a rehab center is a little bit different. As explained in the last video, a rehab center generally is a short-term solution or intervention which can help to create an environment and a set of circumstances and surroundings which will make it easier for you to separate for that period of time from the thing which is causing you difficulty. But as with anything like that, that period of time will end and you will return to a regular environment. So if you sincerely want to maintain your recovery, a long-term solution, generally speaking, needs to be implemented in most cases. The case in which it doesn't need to be implemented is when you simply have a physical substance issue. So if one, for example, is, in my own experience, was physically completely dependent on nicotine for a period of time and would smoke many cigarettes per day, when the time came for me to give up smoking, the only thing that my relationship with smoking purely was a physical dependency that I had. I was chemically addicted to nicotine. Once I was able to separate from a period of time from that substance, there wasn't any deeper work that really needed to take place. I didn't need to implement a really long-term solution to overcome smoking. I just had to get enough time and distance away from the substance that I'd become physically dependent on in order to be able to be free. Now, in recovery philosophy, having that condition, having that purely physical substance issue, doesn't actually qualify you to, in the terms of alcohol, be an alcoholic. It may do in a medical sense, but in terms of 12-step recovery philosophy, the physical aspect is only one part of alcoholism or drug addiction. The second part is what's called the mental obsession. So it's to do with this idea that not only are you physically dependent on the substance, but you have a mental obsession related to it as well. And actually there is a third component, which is also, if you have this third component, it means that purely a physical separation and solution will not be sufficient. It's referred to in 12-step philosophy as a spiritual malady. It can also be related to your sense of self. I'll give you an example. When I smoked cigarettes, nothing in terms of my personality or my sense of myself ever really changed. I just smoked the cigarettes and it was a physical thing and that was about it. When I would drink alcohol, something very fundamentally would transform in my sense of self, in my emotions, in my reactions to life. And it was a much more deep and profound transformation that would occur when I would engage with that substance. And I also had the physical thing where if I had one, I couldn't stop, and the mental obsession when I wasn't drinking, I would think about drinking. And so if you have got to the point with whatever the thing is, where it really affects every aspect of you, not only does it affect perhaps your body, but it affects your mind, you obsess about it, and it also deeply affects your sense of yourself and your personality and your emotional well-being. Generally speaking, if it affects that level of stuff, then purely having physical separation for 28 days and then continuing on in a normal environment is not going to be sufficient enough to make lasting change, because the issue is deeper than just the physical. So, in that sense, going to a rehab is a good start if one can afford it, if one has access to that kind of thing. But in terms of a long-term solution, it generally doesn't help unless you're purely just physically dependent. And that does work for some people. Generally, your own experience will tell you which one you are. So if you go to a rehab and you stay off the thing for those period of times and then you go back and you're very easily able to continue, then you don't need a deeper long-term solution. If you find that actually you become worse after having distance for some time and your emotional well-being and your sense of yourself becomes much worse after you leave those places or after you put down the substance or the behavior or whatever it is, then generally speaking, you need to engage in a process that is deeper, that can lead to a deeper transformation. That is obviously what the 12-step process is for. That is its purpose. Its purpose is to enable you to gain access to a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problems, and to enable you to have this psychic change or spiritual awakening, or you can use those terms interchangeably, so that your reaction to the behavior, the substance, yourself, your environment, your life changes at a very deep level. So, in summary, if you don't need to be medically, physically separated from the substance or the thing, and you don't have the money for a rehab center or anything like that, which is obviously a big obstacle to lots of people, or if you've gone to rehabs before and found that they didn't work in keeping you sober or clean or free for a period of time after that, it can be said that the long-term solution for most people is within a 12-step program, and it is not a requirement that you have to have gone to one of these places beforehand in order to engage in that. Now, also, it's worth stating that rehab centres are very, very different to 12-step programs in the way that they're ran, in the way that they are for profit, generally speaking, and in the way that they're sort of designed, and also philosophically, they're very different. They're not all the same, and some of them operate differently, some of them incorporate the steps, some of them don't, and it's very varied. So again, I don't want to speak for all of that. And I don't really want to share an opinion about whether or not they're good or bad or what exactly is right for you, because not everything is necessarily applicable to everybody. But I think what is applicable to everybody is the understanding around what one needs in order to fix one's problem. So, just to kind of give summary, if I just have a broken leg, then all I need to do is have the physical treatment that will heal that leg, and then I can get back to my life and happy days, and I have to spend a certain amount of time just allowing the physical to heal. If my problem is physical and mental, then I need to attend to both of those things. And if I attend to both of those things, which many people do in rehab centres, and as I said, it works for some and it doesn't work for others, but if it works, then great, no more is needed. If it doesn't work, then you have to somewhat look at a deeper solution, that perhaps this psychic change or this spiritual dimension needs to be looked at. I'll just finish with a story about how actual 12-step programs came to be. And some people may know this, but many probably don't. The original 12-step program was Alcoholics Anonymous, and the way that actually came to be was back in the fairly early 1900s. There was a guy called Roland Hazard, who was a fairly well-to-do American, came from a good family, had good business sense and all of these things, but he was a bit of a hopeless drunk. Because of the connections that his family had, he was able to go and see a lot of the best psychiatrists of that day. And they all tried to help him and give him some form of physical and mental rehabilitation, which is kind of what we've been talking about here. And none of them were able to be successful. He ended up going and spending time with Dr. Carl Jung, who is widely celebrated as one of, if not the greatest psychologists of all time. And he actually spent a long time, I believe it was a year, with Carl Jung, essentially in a rehab. And for that year, Carl Jung worked on his body and his mind and tried all of these processes and practices. And for that period of time, he was able to stay sober. And the story goes that after a year, he left Carl Jung and flew back to America. And they say that he got drunk on the plane home. Now, he liked Carl Jung, he really liked the doctor, and so he went back to see him. And he said to Carl Jung, what went wrong? Is there any hope for me? He was completely baffled as to what had happened. And Carl Jung quite famously says to him, what I've been trying to do is create this deep emotional rearrangement within you. And he says, with many, many people, what I do works, and it works sufficiently that it solves their problem. But he says that he's never been successful in creating that emotional rearrangement in someone like Roland. And he's referring to Roland as an alcoholic, someone who suffers from this multi-dimensional malady or illness or disease, whatever you want to call it. And so Roland says, well, is there any hope for me? And Carl Jung says, very humbly, one of the greatest minds of all time, he looks at him and he says, the only hope for someone like you is to have what is called a spiritual experience. And he says, the experiences are phenomena, we don't really understand them, but they've been happening since the beginning of time. And he really urges him to go and try and find one. Roland ends up going back to America and getting introduced to a spiritual movement of the day called the Oxford Groups, which had similarities to 12-step programs, but differences also, which I won't get into in this. But he ends up getting involved in the Oxford Groups. He ends up getting sober. He then goes and sees his friend called Ebby. Ebby then has the experience, and Ebby then goes to see Bill. And Bill obviously is one of the co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous with Dr. Bob. They developed the 12 steps, and all the 12-step programs obviously come from that. So it's an interesting story. It's quite a cool story because if you're one of those people who just has this physical thing or this physical and mental thing, then many of these places will work for you. But if you have this deeper thing that, this Roland guy had and many, many others have, it's somewhat good news and bad news to see that, the greatest psychologist of all time didn't really have, his rehab wasn't able to give this long-term solution. It could give a short-term solution, but it couldn't give this long-term lasting solution. But fortunately, through 12-step programs, when they're committed to and completed and continued, they are able to give that sufficient psychic change or awakening that has enabled many people, millions of people, to live free and happy. And so hopefully that's helpful. If you have any other questions, please let me know. As I always say, these experiences, opinions are my own. They're not affiliated with anything. They don't speak on behalf of anything, only just as an effort to try and be helpful for people to understand themselves and their issues better, so that they're able to take autonomy themselves and put themselves in the environment that is going to give them the best chance to actually experience recovery and freedom and happiness and joy. If you do find these helpful, please do share them or rate them, so that rate the episode so that more people are able to find them. Otherwise, hope you have a great day.